Hey, what's up, everybody? My name's Curtis Teel. I'm our Twinsburg, Macedonia campus minister, and I'm getting to hang out with you guys on video this week so that Dan, our lead minister, and myself could be at our respective home campuses. And so thanks for letting us hang out this way. Want to say welcome to you if you're hanging out with us online at mochurch.tv. Super glad to have you guys here. Go ahead and grab your Bibles and open up to Ecclesiastes chapter 4, page 541. You can grab the Bibles from the ends of the row, pass those down, open up a new page in your web browser. We'll be using the NIV version today, but if you're hanging out with us in-house and you don't have a Bible at home that you can call your own, feel free to take that paperback one home with you for absolutely free. Today, we're continuing on in our Momentum at the Movie series, and we're talking about the movie Hidden Figures. By round of applause, how many of you, and it might be kind of odd if you're at home watching mochurch.tv, but by round of applause, how many of you have seen the movie Hidden Figures? Anybody clap? Hey, if you haven't seen the movie, man, this is a good movie. I highly recommend that you go home from church today, you Redbox this, rent it on demand, because I loved this movie. I felt kind of bad the last couple years going into our Momentum at the Movie series because I just don't typically go and see a lot of movies. And so when we come into the movie series, I've got to land, I kind of end up going through like a movie watching marathon. And I got to Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures was the first one I watched, and I loved it, and I knew that it would be a movie that I was doing. So if you haven't seen Hidden Figures, you have got to go see this movie. And there's so many good things that we could talk about coming out of the movie. After you watch this movie, there's so many things that I think we could learn or that Jesus would want to teach us based off of this specific movie. Several of the things that I think we could talk about, we actually have talked about at Momentum before. And so one of the things that we could talk about based on this movie and when it's setting is racism. Now, we're not really focusing on that this morning in particular, but I'm not trying to sidestep it at all. In fact, October 11th, 2015, we did talk about that specific topic in our Elephant at the Room series. And so I'd really encourage you to, go check out that podcast, give that a listen. But the bottom line is, or where we kind of end up in this in that message is, we know that there are still some real major issues that we need to get better at as a people, doing our best to follow Jesus, and because of that, to love people. Another topic that we could talk about based off of this movie in particular is sexism. In the opening scene, which you saw in the trailer that they played just before this message started, in the opening scene where the police officer's there and you see him kind of roll up on top of our three main ladies in the movie, and he says in the trailer, man, I had no idea that NASA hired, and he kind of leaves the blank. All of us, or at least for me, immediately want to fill in the blank with African American, but Dorothy cuts him off and says, yeah, there's quite a few women working in the space program. And you're like, oh, man, they had that going against them as well because of the time period that the movie is set in. And so that's definitely something that we want to talk about in the future. In fact, we've got it slated for a future Elephant in the Room series. Man, it's something that I've kind of grown passionate about. Having three daughters myself has really opened my eyes to a lot of the things that people say and so on. It's really given me kind of new understanding of the phrase that you never understand until you walk with someone who does. And so I just wanted to say my intent this morning with this message isn't to dodge any of those topics, because it's just kind of hard to miss those themes when you sit down and you watch this movie. So my intent's not to dodge those huge social topics that the movie touches on, but there's something else that this movie just absolutely kills at. There's something else that this movie does that we just don't typically see in today's Hollywood films, especially when it focuses in on some big event where it's based on a true life story. And so this movie, Hidden Figures, it chronicles the story of the United States space race against the Soviet Union, against Russia, to put a man into space. It was kind of an all-hands-on-deck adventure that needed everyone doing everything they possibly could to chip in and help figure this out and make it happen. And so NASA, being kind of short-handed, found untapped talent in a group of African-American women, female mathematicians. And they served as the major brains behind one of the greatest operations in United States history. And as I did my research on this movie, I found out that there are literally hundreds of women. There are literally hundreds of women that this story could have been told about. There are so many people behind the scenes that were going in, but this movie kind of hones in and focuses on three specific ladies. And we got a kind of a picture here for you. So this is Mary Jackson. It hones in on these three ladies. Mary Jackson, Dorothy Vaughan, and then here this lady in the middle kind of ends up being our main protagonist, Katherine Johnson. And so it centers in on the lives of these women, both their professional careers and their home life careers. And the movie's based on the unbelievably true life stories of these three women, known as, at the time, as human computers. You see, this movie takes place before we had like calculators on our phone, before we had computers. And so essentially what would happen with NASA is, engineers and stuff would kind of put all the formulas together, and then they would hand them off to someone else that they called computers. And they would sit down and they would compute the formulas, they'd compute the numbers that they handed to them so that they could figure out, what they needed to do, what they needed to adjust in order to have a successful mission. And so it's alongside these three women, human computers, that were specifically in charge of calculating the momentous launch of astronaut John Glenn, which is kind of like the center of the movie, John Glenn into orbit, and then guaranteeing his safe return home. Now, the key thing that I feel like I need to mention this morning is that this movie is based on a true story. It's not a documentary. And so some of the things like timelines and lives, like the people's connections, have been condensed to help tell the story throughout the movie. But overall, many historians have come out and said that they do a really good job of historically accurately telling this story. So this morning, we're going to focus on specifically the story that the movie tells. Now, there's also a book that kind of chronicles more of the true life story. And so if you go and you happen to read the book, some of the timelines might not match up. But this morning, we're focusing on the story that the movie tells. And so one of the many things, in fact, the main thing we're going to focus in on this morning, one of the things that this movie does that absolutely kills at is that there's not just one hero within the story. There's not just one hero. In fact, many of the movies that, they get told, especially on somebody who's kind of a math-brained person, it really kind of hones in on how kind of egotistical they are, how arrogant they are, and how, like, without that one person, the whole mission falls apart. But the one thing that this movie does really well is that it's a team. In fact, it's a team. It's a team of these three women, but it's also these three women plus the people that are around them in their lives. At Twinsburg, Macedonia, our worship director, his name's Andre, and Andre sent me an article as I was prepping for this message in particular from The Atlantic, and I just want to read you some excerpts out of it. It says this, The Atlantic said this as a movie review for Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures is not that kind of film. It's a story of brilliance, but not one of ego. It's a story of struggle and willpower, but not of individual glory. Set in the 1960s Virginia, the film centers on three pioneering African-American women. These women, Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, Dorothy Vaughan, were superlative mathematicians and engineers despite starting their careers in the segregation-era America and facing discrimination at home, at school, and at work. And yet, Hidden Figures pays tribute to its subjects by doing the opposite of what many biopics, which I had to look up, by the way, just means biography films that tell a story based on does the opposite of what many biopics have done in the past. It looks closely, and I love this. I love the way it says this. It looks closely at the remarkable person in the context of a community. The film celebrates individual metal, but it also focuses on the way its characters consistently try to lift others up. They're phenomenal at what they do, but they're also generous with their time, their energy, and their patience toward one another. And from the very outset of the movie, it becomes crystal clear that this is about a trio of women. It makes it clear that it's not about just a lone ranger, but it's about this team of three women who have banded together to handle life together. And you see, kind of as the movie plays out, that these three women, they ride with one another. They share heartaches with one another. They dream with one another. They laugh with one another. They hurt with one another. They celebrate and they grieve with one another. And it becomes crystal clear As one goes, so go the other two. And then on top of that, they even give you a little bit bigger picture because they're all part of a team. And even outside of that, it's the same sort of deal. As one goes, they all go. And even when, as a team, they don't always see eye to eye together, they find a way to band together and accomplish this huge mission together, to love and support, to fight for each other. It's pretty amazing. And as I was watching this movie, and I've seen specifically this trio of women kind of going and fighting for one another, I couldn't help but come back to this one verse over and over and over again. In fact, it's a pretty popular verse. Maybe you've heard it oftentimes, hear it at weddings, but it reads like this. Ecclesiastes 4, starting in verse 9, it reads just like this. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. Verse 10, if either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves, and I love this part right here. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Now, the guy who wrote this is a guy named Solomon, and many consider him to be the wisest man that ever lived. He's definitely a wise man, just got tons of wisdom sayings that he gives to us. And I love the way he ends it there. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Now, when I was in 3rd grade, we took a field trip. We took a field trip to some farm, and I don't know why I remember this specifically, but one of the things that the only thing that really sticks out to me about this field trip was on this field trip, they taught us how rope was made. And they had this like little special wooden device, like this hand crank device, where they took a bunch of individual strands, like twine, and they hooked them to hooks, and then they kind of like hand cranked them together. And so what Solomon's saying here is demonstrating to us something that, we understand, that a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Now, my wife had some of this twine downstairs like on her craft table, and it just so happens that it's made up of 3 strands. And I was looking at it, and if I separate the strands, and I take just one in my hand, it's pretty easy for me to snap it. It's pretty easy for me to break it. But when you twist them together, and they become intertwined together, and they're wrapped around, and you put them together, all of a sudden, it becomes a lot stronger, to where it's not easily broken. You see, each strand, so for us, with Solomon, what he's saying here in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 is each strand represents a person. Each individual strand represents a person. And what he's hoping for is that over time, like you'll become close enough, that your lives will become so entwined with each other. You'll be around each other enough that you can team up, that you can band together, and you become stronger to where you're not easily broken. Because you've got strands around you, because you've got people around you that love and care for you. Now, so one of the things is, I know it may be a little cheesy, but we've actually got some small strips of this that's sitting out on the CD table where we keep our CDs of today's service. And if you want to, I would love for you to take a small piece of that home with you. Maybe put it on your dashboard or set it next to your nightstand to remind you, man, we need to be a strand. And that we need strands. This is what we long for. I think all of us, to some extent, long to have strands in our lives. Other people that we can trust and band together with and encourage each other to keep pressing forward regardless of what life throws at us. And so several places in the movie, within the 3-stranded trio in the bigger community here, it's demonstrated how the community is needed to push each other on. That's one of the things that is pretty easy to see in the movie, that you need that strand to push you on, someone else in that strand to push you forward. In the movie, Mary needs Dorothy and an engineer to push her to believe and become an engineer. Dorothy needs Catherine and Mary to encourage her to keep working. Catherine needs Dorothy to encourage her that she belongs alongside NASA's greatest minds. And then it breaks out into every part of the movie. Al Harrison, who's Kevin Costner's character, the director of the Space Task Group, he needs Catherine and John Glenn to challenge him to be a boss and a leader. Levi Jackson, who happens to be Mary Jackson's husband, needs his wife, Mary, and Dorothy to maintain a level head and peace as Mary pursues becoming the first female engineer. Seriously, I could keep the list going. When you sit down and watch this movie, that was a super easy list to come up with of ways, of places where you see all these people banding together, these people who have strands who make them stronger than just being by themselves, that can push them and challenge them and encourage them to handle life as it gets handed to them. So this is the biggest thing that I love about the movie, is it shows clearly the value of being in community. How that the community you surround yourself with determines how your life goes. And so the question I want to ask you this morning is, who are your strands? Who are your strands? Who are the people that you turn to when life gets tough, that you can band together with and can help you continue to take one step at a time and face what life throws at you? And are those, and so all of us to some extent I think have this, but here's the kind of the next level question is, are they people who, like Solomon says, are helping pick you up and they're helping you get better? Are they people who are helping you up and helping you get better? Or are they people who are picking you up and putting you back in a place where you can fall down again? Are they people who are picking you up and helping you get better? Or are they people who are picking you up and putting you back in a place, not challenging you, not pushing you, not encouraging you to where you're eventually going to fall down again? Now, here's the crazy part about this. This is crazy. All of us have people around us. Some are people that we choose to surround ourselves with, our friends. And then sometimes, oftentimes we're surrounded with people who we don't necessarily choose to have in our lives, at work, our neighbors, for example. Now here, get this. We live in an age where we are learning more about the brain than ever before. And I'm really enjoying learning about it. Now, there's a neuroscientist whose name is Morin Cerf. And this year, he released a study on the brain that was reported on by several news outlets like Business Insider, Unified Field and Technology, Fortune Magazine. And there are some really interesting quotes on the findings that Morin Cerf had in this article. His neuroscience research, he says this in one of the articles, his neuroscience research has found that when two people are in each other's company, their brain waves will begin to look nearly identical. In other words, your brain waves begin to sync up and you begin to feel and look at things in life as that other person does. Now get this, Morin Cerf said this in his actual study. The more we study engagement, we see time and again that just being next to certain people actually aligns your brain with them. Based on their mannerisms, the smell of the room, the noise level, and many other factors. This means that the people you hang out with actually have an impact on your engagement, your perception, your mood, the way you feel about life. This means that the people you hang out with actually have an impact on your engagement with reality beyond what you're even able to explain. And one of the effects of this is you become alike. Whoa. Like, that's kind of crazy. The people, so in other words, what he's saying, the people you surround yourself with, you begin to become. So look left, look right. Yeah, how does that make you feel? I mean, it's a little scary, right? Like, personally, I would love to see the brain scan or what happens to the brains of a Steelers fan sitting next to a Browns fan. I'd just love to see what that would shake out to be. But here's the deal. Morin Cerf, this neuroscientist, he's really just reporting on scientific evidence to back up what the Bible's been telling us for years. And honestly, what we've known for years. In fact, your parents have probably said this to you in some form, or you've had a teacher or a grandparent who have said something like this to you for years. Now, a guy named Paul, he ends up writing a letter to the church in Corinth. Paul's one of the founding fathers of the church, so to speak. And he writes this letter to the church in Corinth. And this is what he said. And my guess is you've heard something like this. 1 Corinthians 15:33, Paul says this, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." Or more often how we hear it, bad company corrupts good morals. And here's the thing, and this is huge. This isn't just a Bible thing, right? Even if you don't believe it, this isn't a Bible thing. This is a thing, right? This is a life thing. This is a fact of life. And the cool part is this isn't original with Paul. Paul didn't just like write this into the Bible. Paul's actually quoting an ancient Greek poet named Menander, right? Because we just understand this. Bad company corrupts good character. Bad company corrupts good morals. Our friends determine the direction and the quality of our life. Students, that's why your parents are so paranoid or so concerned with who your friends are. Parents, this is why you're so concerned with who your students' friends are, right? Because you remember who, right? You remember you. You remember you and your friends, and you know that who you surround yourself with matters. Who you surround yourself with matters. Now get this, many, many years prior to that, Solomon, the same guy who wrote that first verse that we read in Ecclesiastes, he wrote us a proverb, which is just kind of a quick, nice saying. Man, and I want you to memorize this. I'm so into memorizing proverbs because there's so much wisdom packed in there. Solomon writes this. He says this in Proverbs 13:20. He says, walk with the wise and you become wise. Right? Same thing Moore and Surf said. Walk with the wise, you become wise. For a companion of fools suffers harm. You hang out with the wise, and you too are going to naturally begin. You're just going to soak it up. You're just going to naturally begin to also become wise. And I love it because he does kind of a play on words here, right? You see it and you read it and you see, walk with the wise and you become wise. And you expect him to say, walk with the fool and you too will become a fool. But he takes it to the next level, right? He plays it out just one more step. Yeah, walk with the wise and you'll become wise, but if you hang out with a fool, sooner or later, you're going to suffer harm. If you hang out with them, sooner or later, it's not going to play out well, and you're going to end up suffering harm because of that. Same way, as they go, you go. A friend who is not careful with their life is not going to be careful with your life. And so I kind of hear what you're saying. So, like, Curtis, wait a minute. So are you saying that maybe I shouldn't hang out with them? Like, they're my friends, Curtis. Like, are you saying that I should maybe stop surrounding myself? Well, maybe. But I'm not necessarily saying that. But I know, because I know how judgmental that ends up seeming to sound. But here's the deal. I think this isn't so much judgmental as maybe just an opportunity for us to exercise good judgment on achieving our goals, achieving where it is we want to be, as getting better as a person who's moving forward to love God and love people. See, there's a big difference. There's a big difference between being judgmental and exercising good judgment. See, being judgmental is all about me making a conclusion about you, right? It's all about you. Being judgmental is all about you. Me saying what you should or should not do. Me saying what you can or cannot handle. But exercising good judgment, that's all about me. That's all about me and what I can or cannot handle, what I should or should not be doing. And so many things, I think we're just so quick right now to say, oh man, that's so judgmental. But this isn't judgmental. This is encouraging us to exercise good judgment. And the Bible, specifically Proverbs, man, talks a whole lot about wisdom. It talks a whole lot about being wise, and it also talks a whole lot about being a fool. And essentially the question you have to answer is, well, which do you want to be? Do you want to be wise, or do you want to be a fool? And the best way that I've heard wisdom talked about is that wise people understand that the dots of life are connected. That my past decisions and my present decisions are going to have a direct impact on where I am in the future. But a fool, the foolish person, the unwise person, lives as if it doesn't matter. That the dots in life aren't connected. And so if you want to be wise, we've got to walk with the wise. The Bible says, Solomon says, the same thing that Moore and Surf says. And the same thing that we see unfold in the movie Hidden Figures. If you want to be wise, then you need to walk with the wise. In the movie, in the very beginning of the movie, Hidden Figures, Katherine Johnson's parents recognize her potential, recognize that what great potential she has, and so they actually make the tough decision to pull her out of the school she's in and to move from where they live so that they can put her in the presence of wise so that she would be able to achieve her potential. Because they understood, if you want to be wise, then you need to get with the wise. Now, here's why I tell you all of this today, because I know that you cannot always control who you surround yourself with, right? You can't control who you work with. Students, you can't necessarily control who you go to school with, who's in your classes with you. You can't always control who's in the same after-school programs you are, the extracurricular activities. Can't always control who your neighbors are. And so the reason I tell you this today is that there are times where we do have a choice. And so when you can choose who you surround yourself with, make sure it's people who will challenge you to be better. Make sure it's people who want you and you want to be a strand. Make sure it's people that you're walking with who are the wise. When you have a choice, make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who want to be a strand, to be intertwined in your life, to help pick you up the way Solomon talks about. Man, the past 6 months or so, there's just so many like health problems that was going on in my Mo group. Our Mo groups are small groups of 6 to 12 people that meet in someone's home where we play a game together. We talk about usually what we talk about on Sunday morning, but on a more practical level, like what's it mean for me specifically and my family. And, we really just honestly become strands together. That's the goal. And I've really regrown passionate about our Mo groups because there were so many like health things going on and individual family things. And when I look at Jesus and the way he hung out with his students and he helped them understand what it looks like to really love God and love people, you can't deny that for Jesus it was all about the small groups. These guys banding together, becoming strands of friends to help challenge and encourage each other to be better, all pursuing being better together at their individual things, but also together. And then I look at groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and other groups like it. I mean, they're built around helping you find freedom by finding a strand of people that you can band together with. And so the bottom line is you've got to have a strand. You have got to have a strand. And that's why we say the heart of momentum is our Mo groups. And leaders, if you're leading a Mo group, that's why, man, our job is to help people get strands within our Mo groups because they're not going to connect with everybody in your group, but the goal is to get them to connect to a couple of each other so that they can encourage and challenge each other to continually move forward in their love for God and their love for people. Now, as I started sitting down and I started thinking about what I would like my strands, like what do I need out of my strands? Because I think one of the reasons why we need strands is because we need each other. We're stronger together. And so what are the things that we get from each other that help us be stronger? Now in the Bible, there's 59 one another verses that just kind of tell us how we're essentially supposed to one another, how we're supposed to like band together, become strands to each other. And I think probably for each of us, at least these are my top three. These are the top three that I think I need from my strands. And what my guess is they'll be very similar to what you think you need as your top three from your strands. So the first is, man, that we need to encourage one another. Hebrews 10:25 says this, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing. We kind of join in mid-sentence, and it says, but encouraging one another, all the more as you see the day approaching. Man, and this is so big too, not giving up meeting together. Our Mo groups, we just started them again last week. So if you haven't gone to one, man, we just relaunched them. Please get your butt to a Mo group. That's where you're going to begin to find a strand, where you can really, Sunday morning is great, but the heart of momentum, where you're really going to find those people where you can band together, where you're going to find those strands, is in a Mo group. And what we need is to encourage one another. In the movie, Katherine Johnson, she's not feeling like she gets a promotion, and she's not really feeling like she fits in the room with all these great minds who are helping calculate these things for these space launches, essentially. And she's really kind of down on herself, and she's riding home. In fact, you see a little bit of it in the trailer that we showed, and she's just kind of dogging on herself. And Dorothy, who's one of those, part of that trio, she kind of breaks in, and she tells them, Katherine, you absolutely belong in that room. Just make that pencil work as fast as your head does. Stop thinking and start doing. Man, and we all need that, right? Like, it's so encouraging when it happens in the movie, and it's so encouraging when that happens. Like, all of us need something like that. Like, you can do it. I've got your back. We're here together. Just one step at a time. We're in this together. You can do it. Man, we all need something like that, don't we? Where we can encourage one another to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. We need to encourage one another, and that goes so far in helping us face life. The other thing, the second thing that I feel like I need from my strands, and I think you probably feel like you would need too, and here's the thing, is this is the one we don't typically like. Like, we like the idea of it, but we don't like when it applies to us, and that's to admonish one another. That's how the Bible says it, but the idea is to challenge or to push one another. Colossians 3:16 says this. He says, let the message of Christ dwell among you as richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms and hymns and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And the idea is to challenge or to push each other to be better. And oftentimes that's a little out of our comfort zone. But in the movie, Catherine, probably like the coolest scene in the movie, Catherine's, she's trying to calculate all these numbers, and she knows that she needs to be in this room because data is changing so fast. And she's pushing, and there's like, look, there's no protocol for a woman to be in these meetings. And Al Harrison, Kevin Costner's character, comes up and goes, hey, what's going on here? It's like, she wants to come in the meeting. And he says, well, who's in charge here? Who makes the decision? And Catherine, in one of her many moments of boldness, stands up to him and says, you are, sir, you are the boss. You just need to act like one. And you're like, ooh. But that pushes him and helps him to step up to be a leader. Dorothy in the movie, she pushes Mary Jackson to shut up and stop whining and to get after being an engineer. Now, here's the bottom line. I'm not here because I'm perfect. I'm not in church this morning because I'm perfect. I'm here, I'm following Jesus because I want to get better. I want to be better at life. And I think Jesus teaches me how to do that. I want to be better at loving God and better at loving people. And so I know, because there are no perfect people allowed here at Momentum, that I've got to get better, that we've got to get better, and that's going to take some admonishment. When we talk about what it looks like to follow Jesus, it uses the term like discipleship. That's the idea of being a student of Jesus is discipleship. And the best definition that I've ever heard of discipleship is gentle pressure relentlessly applied. And it's the idea that just kind of constantly, gently pushing each other to be better, admonishing one another. And the last thing, or the third thing that I think all of us want, I think this goes such a long way, is that we will be there for one another, or that we'll bear with one another in love. And the idea essentially, I think, is that you'll always have a home to come back to. That no matter how far you feel like you've strayed, no matter how bad you feel like you've messed up, that you've always got someone there waiting for you to continue walking with you. Ephesians 4:2 says this. It says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Man, and this one's repeated so many times in those 59 verses. And in the movie, once Catherine gets her promotion, she has to stay several hours. The three of the women ride together to work, and she has to stay many hours, several hours after when the other two ladies would have gotten to go home. And she's walking outside, and you can see the stress kind of wearing on her because she fully expects she's going to have to ride the bus home. And when she walks out the doors and it's dark outside, there they are, Dorothy and Mary, still there waiting at the car for her. And you can just see the relief in her face that her friends were still there waiting for her. Man, and that's what we need. That's what we need to do for each other. We need to bear with, be patient with, to show up, to be there for one another. This past semester, there's a guy in my Mo group who got cancer. His name's Brad Mercurio. I got permission to share this with you this morning. And when he got the news that he had cancer, as you can expect, it hit him and his family extremely hard. And so he started going through radiation and all the tough side effects that come along with that, and then some kind of on top of that set in for him. And several at our Twinsburg, Macedonia campus, we have a prayer group that meets during our 8 a.m. service. They meet in kind of a side room, and they just pray for the prayer requests that people send in here and our Twinsburg, Macedonia campus and just pray for other things that are going on. And one of the things they were praying for was Brad Mercurio and his radiation. And so they were oftentimes emailing and checking in with him and his wife, Lisa, seeing how they were doing. And one Sunday morning over the summer, I just happened to be passing Lisa at our Twinsburg, Macedonia campus, and I stopped her and I said, "Hey, Lisa," I said, how are you and Brad doing? And this is what she said back to me. She said, "You know, if it weren't for that prayer group and Mike Love checking in on us, I don't know how we'd be. That's meant so much to Brad, and it's really helped him just continue to put one foot in front of the other." You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like a strand. Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes that, man, this is all about just picking someone up, being there to pick someone up when they fall. It's not some super glorious thing, but it's the showing up and helping in small ways. Like this prayer group and Mike Love with Brad. It wasn't like, they didn't say, "Hey, Brad, we can't solve cancer. We can't take cancer away from you. But you know what? We can pray about it. We can pray about it and help you take one step at a time." I mean, that's a strand. Who are your strands? Who are you being a strand to? Man, I really hope that you will take a step out. And I know it's kind of nerve-wracking, but that this week you will go and you will check out a Mo Group Fair. Because remember, and you can't always surround yourself with. You can't always choose who you surround yourself with. But if you walk with the wise, you too will become wise. But a companion of fools suffers harm. Let's pray. God, we love you. God, thanks for this wisdom in your word. God, thanks for this movie, Hidden Figures, that just shows us it's so important, the community that's around us. God, help us to find these strands. God, help us to find the strands of people in life that not only are going to help pick us up, but also help us to be better. God, we love you deeply. And I just really pray that you will help us to find the strands in our life. It's in your Son's holy, awesome, amazing name we pray. Amen.